Right, time to start talking. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Kate and I make books about books and bookish things. So it turns out I'm an idiot and I don't know my own intro. Hello, my name is Kate, welcome to my channel and I make videos about books and bookish things. And I am back at university, as you may have guessed. I took about a month and a half off from filming. I filmed a whole load of videos before I left university back at end of December, early January time. And then I've just been getting stuck back into being at university. I've had a very, very busy month and a half. As soon as I got back in January, I was fully in rehearsals for my first play that I've directed. I took part in a piece of student-written theatre. Absolutely amazing. Also, my friend Scout, you know, the one I mention pretty frequently because, like, I talk about this stuff with them quite a lot. Yeah, they promoted my channel to the entire cast and crew of the play I was in, so hello B-folk, I miss you dearly. Enjoy. So that took up a significant portion of my time. So after that I was exhausted and severely behind on all of my reading. I decided to take this week off. It was the first week in a while where I have not gone to anything as well as not done anything because I enjoy going to the theatre, meeting up with friends, getting to know more people. But I just needed a week to myself, so I spent this last week just catching back up on my reading, taking some time to just chill, and it's been great. However, I need some things to do. My essay season starts up again in the next couple of weeks. I have my first essay deadline on the 2nd of March, so before all of that kicks in, I thought it was time to update you once more on the books and other material that I have been reading for university, because I like my degree a lot. I adore all of the reading that I am doing for it, even the stuff that I don't enjoy as much. I can typically appreciate to some level, so yeah, I just wanted to talk about it, and because it is the majority of the reading I do nowadays. Although, to be fair, the story graph is letting me know that I am 11 books ahead of schedule or something absolutely ridiculous currently because I'm just reading so much. I think I read 9 books in January, which is more than I was doing on my gap year, which I'm shocked. So yeah, I just wanted to go through the list, talk a little bit about some of the things in particular that I either really enjoyed or really didn't enjoy, or just have some cool things to share based on my lectures and my learning. So yeah, I'll just run through it. Side note, I have managed to read 3 books for fun so far this year, and I am absolutely goddamn thrilled. So just before I left for university, I read Baker Thief by Claudia Arsenault. A delight, enjoyed it so much. I don't have much more succinct thoughts than just it was fantastic. If you want fun queer books, please read. I also read The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. Again, delightful, queer, so much fun. I immediately lent it to my college wife because I knew she would adore it, and she's currently on chapter 7 and is updating me frequently with how much she's loving it. We love to see it. And then the other day I just finished Guard Your Heart by Sue Divan? I wrote a storygraph review if you want to see my thoughts on it. I didn't think particularly highly of it. It could have been so much better, was my thoughts. Anyway, things I've read for fun aside. To recap, as I said in my last video, I do 6 English modules this year. They're all equally weighted, and so these books are for the variety of things I have to read for each of these modules. They are Introduction to Drama, Introduction to the Novel, Introduction to Poetry, and then Classical and Biblical Backgrounds to English Literature, Romance and the Literature of Chivalry, and Epic and the Literature of Legend. Let's get to the bulk of what I've been reading. I have it all written down as before, because otherwise there's no chance I'd remember all of this. So, going in chronological order from the things I read as soon as I got back to university up until things that I finished a couple of days ago, we have The Knight's Tale from the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, The Battle of Maldon, The Iliad by Homer, Paradise Lost by John Milton, I'm gonna pronounce this wrong, Volspar, Atlach Vida, I know that one a little bit better, Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, The Cenci by Percy Shelley, Oedipus Rex by Sophocles, The Franklin's Tale from Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde, Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw, Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller, A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry, Ale Saga, and then Sonatoric, which is a specific poem within it that I looked at separately in lectures. Lachdela Saga, The Aeneid by Virgil, White Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys, Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett, and currently reading, although I have marked it down because I deserve credit for it frankly, Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. I'm about 100 pages into it and I'm really enjoying it so far. So that is everything that I have read at this point in the term. I have a couple of things that I will read before we break for the Easter holiday, but to be honest, I'll be doing my best. There's a handful of things that I was due to read this term that I didn't. For example, Bleak House by Charles Dickens. That book is nearly 900 pages long and I do not like Dickens. There was no way I was going to write about it at any point this year, so I just said absolutely not. Also, in the same vein, Plato's Republic. I'm not going to write about it, as cool as it might be to read a piece of philosophical literature from ancient Greece. I can't be doing with that. When I was getting severely behind while doing my play, I was just there going, why must I have all the 500-page classical texts in this portion of time? Why is this the time to do this? Anyway, so I also haven't yet read The Odyssey by Homer, which I was also meant to read, or Aristotle's Poetics, as well as Plato's Republic. I'm going to try to read The Odyssey just because I think I will quite enjoy it. I like the Overly Sarcastic Productions video on it at the very least, and that has been what's gotten me through a lot of these longer classic works, so I want to read it, if only to say that I've read it, like with the Iliad and the Aeneid. I may attempt Aristotle's Poetics just because it not only has relevance to my classical and biblical module, but also to my drama module, as you can expect. He's literally writing about theatre. So I'm just going to chat in order, I think. So, The Knight's Tale first. I had to read Canterbury Tales in the original Middle English, and can I just say, of all the useless skills to force university students to learn, why would you pick a redundant form of the language they already speak? No one needs to know Old or Middle English nowadays unless you are an academic studying these texts, and I'm not going to say I'm turning away from academia as a potential career path at some point. I like books, I like talking about books, as illustrated by this right now. However, the kinds of books that I want to be thinking and talking more about just aren't the ones written in Old and Middle English, so I fortunately managed to find one sort of modern English translation that was fairly faithful to the Middle English that I sort of cross-referenced between so that I could just get through it, and that helped significantly, but just, yeah, it's not worth it. It's so not worth it. I know I have the option to do a module next year in which you can learn to read and speak Old and Middle English, and just no thanks. The Iliad by Homer. This I was very interested to read, not least because, as I'm sure you are aware, the internet is rather fond of The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller at the moment. I read that last summer, as I think a lot of people did, and I really enjoyed it. I've also read another adaptation of the Iliad, that being The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker, and I really enjoyed both of them. I thought they were incredibly interesting, and so I was excited to get to see the original source material in as much as I can. I can't read ancient Greek, and apparently there are over 1,000 various manuscripts and fragments of the Iliad that exist to translators nowadays, so whatever translation you read is made up from the hodgepodge of those that are given different value by different researchers, so it was interesting. However, I'm sure I've only got a sliver of perspective on the Iliad because I just read one translation. I'm not that much of a sadist. I could not handle multiple iterations of the Iliad. It was interesting. It was very interesting, I found, not least because, of course, The Silence of the Girls and The Song of Achilles both focus much more on the humans of the story. The Song of Achilles focuses on Patroclus and Achilles as lovers, and then The Silence of the Girls focuses on Briseis and the other kidnapped Trojan women who are being held in the Greek camp. But it means that the whole story revolves around these mortals and their battle, whereas the Iliad is, if anything, much more focused on the gods. It focuses on the battles between the mortals as being what the gods are doing. The whole Trojan War begins because of a disagreement between the gods, and so you end up with these sort of flashes of perspective between the gods overseeing things from Mount Olympus, you know, swooping in to change how things go, or to pull people in and out of action, and ultimately deciding on the fate of who wins or loses the war. war, but it meant that the human characters are much more like puppets of the gods rather than, you know, people who are making their own choices being influenced by the gods. I found it really, really interesting. It took me like a month and 4 days to read because it's just so long and it gets really quite repetitive. When you've read battle scenes on about 7 separate occasions and they all follow the same rough formula with throwing in more obscure Greek names, you just get a bit bored of it. So yeah, I will admit I skimmed over some of those towards the end, but I don't think I can be blamed for that. Paradise Lost by John Milton. I didn't like this very much. I thought I was going to enjoy it. One of the things that I think I'm realising as of late is that although I thought I really liked the romantic poets, I like them as people, not as writers. I don't even want to say I like them as people because they all did some really despicable things and are generally not people I approve of, but I find them and their lives fascinating. I don't like their style of poetry. It's so verbose and grandiose and excessive and utterly ridiculous, and so I enjoy indulging in a little bit of it every so often because it's just kind of funny. But Paradise Lost is 12 books long. It's a long old poem and it's about the Bible and it is in perhaps the most verbose, grand style. It is literally called the grand style. It ain't my thing. I read the couple of books that I needed to for the lecture and then for the subsequent tutorial, but now I'm considering writing my essay this term for the poetry module on it because there is a question about viewing Milton's style as verbose and to what extent do you agree or disagree, you know, how valid is this claim? And I kind of want to talk about it because I don't think there's anything wrong with it as a style. It's very luxurious to read. However, oh my god, does it get boring after a time because, man, can you just say something straightforward? Entertaining to say I've read parts of it. Did I like it? Not really. I got sick of it quite quickly. Okay, I want to talk about Oedipus Rex. I had to read Oedipus. At this point, I feel like Oedipus and the Oedipus complex are so ingrained in our collective conscience that it was really interesting to finally, you know, encounter the man, the myth, the legend himself, and to read the play by Sophocles. Of course, this was one translation of it, yada yada. Obviously, there will be other iterations based on different translators' views of the work, but the one that we read was really good and I found it really entertaining to read, not least because there is such aggressive, painful foreshadowing, and I loved reading it because you sit there with these lines where Oedipus is there going, oh, my country's been befallen because someone murdered the king. I will look for the man who murdered the king like he was my own father. And you just sit there going, oh no, oh god. It's really interesting to read and I very much enjoyed actually the experience, and now I really want to see it staged. I want to watch a performance of it because there is so much I think you could do with it, especially in a modern setting. But yeah, really cool experience. Glad to have read it as well. It's much easier to read than you'd think. It's a pretty short play as well. Would recommend. Can't believe I'm sat here recommending Oedipus Rex. This is what university does. The Franklin's Tale in the Canterbury Tales. I really liked this one actually. Although the Knight's Tale I really struggled with, mostly because I was purely reading it in the Middle English. I had not yet found my modern English translation. It was pretty hard to get through. The Franklin's Tale, however, I had my modern English translation, so I read that, read the Wikipedia, made myself familiar with the story before attempting the Middle English. And it's a really interesting, fun story. It's about a woman and her husband who are deeply in love with each other, and they have a marriage that was forged due to a mutual respect for each other. However, the husband has to go out to fight, and so the woman is left alone and she is heartbroken being without her husband, until this strapping young man turns up and says, hey, I want to marry you. And she says, no. But not on the basis of her being married. She says, I will never marry you. The only condition under which I might marry you is if you can remove all the stones from the coast of Brittany so that my husband's ship can make its safe return. And the man goes, bet. And so he goes and finds a wizard who clears the rocks off the beach, and he turns up on her doorstep and goes, look at how clear that beach is. The husband returns because of course the cliffside is now very easily accessible, and he meets his wife and she goes, babe, I did something really stupid. I promised to marry this man if he could clear the beaches, and he cleared the beaches, but I don't want to marry him. And the husband says, look, if you break your oath to this man, it would be as bad as breaking your oath to marry me. Therefore, you have to marry him. To be true to your word to him is to be true to our marriage vows. And as much as I don't want to see you marry this man, I would rather you remain honest and true to yourself. And so she agrees. She goes to marry the other man, and he goes, well, that was quite sweet, wasn't it? You know what? Because you're such an honest woman, you can stay with your husband. I'll stop being a dick. I found it a really interesting story, this idea of the value of words and your actions over the intentions, because of course this woman doesn't say, if you can clear the beach I'll marry you, because she actually wants to. She says it because it's an impossibility. It's like saying when pigs fly. But then this notion of medieval marriage, we talked about this a lot in the lecture, the notion of medieval marriage was less so about a religious commitment, because in those days Christianity was still fairly new and they hadn't yet corroborated marriage as being a religious thing. Marriage was much more about just promising to be together. It's why you need a witness at weddings. And so in order for this woman's word as a wife to be valid, she had to hold up her end of the bargain, because otherwise she's a liar and she may as well have not married her husband in the first place. I don't know, I just really liked it. I think I'm going to write about this one in my essay as well, because it was just such an entertaining story, and I don't know, I like these sort of folkloric Arthurian romances. They're entertaining. The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. I had such a good time reading this, as you can imagine. I don't think I need to say anything about this. I saw The Importance of Being Earnest live streamed from a London theatre back in, God, must have been 2018 or 2019. It's fantastic. Loved it. Would recommend. It's also just a really fun one to read as well. His dialogue is so engaging that I feel like it's a very easy one to picture in your mind, as much as seeing it on stage is obviously fantastic as well. Oscar Wilde deserves all the love and adoration that he gets even now. Okay, I had to read these two plays together for a tutorial, which firstly was really annoying because it was out of sync with the things we were reading for lectures, so I had to do 2 extra bits of reading in 1 week as well as what we were reading for the lecture. But together I read Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller and then A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry. Both are American plays as opposed to Western European ones, and I think they're both fantastic. However, because they've been put together for the tutorial, I was working on the basis of, oh, these are going to have some pretty clear similarities. One of the obvious being tragedy. A Raisin in the Sun is one of the only plays, well, one of the only texts in my first year of my degree written by a Black author, and so going into it knowing it is set in 1920s Harlem, I was very prepared for there to be lynchings, hate crimes, racism, awful things, and so the whole way through I was just, you know, toes clenched, desperately hoping nothing happened to these characters, and then when nothing did, I was so relieved. The play doesn't exactly end with confirmation they're all going to be okay. There is some suggestion there will be more uprooting to their life, but I was just so pleased I didn't have to read it directly on the page because, you know, Death of a Salesman, absolutely fucking miserable. I don't think I need to say that. It's like the archetypal modern tragedy and it's just so sad. What I will do though is I will link below the Overly Sarcastic Productions video on the tragedy because I found it really, really interesting even when it first came out, let alone now that I've read most of the plays that Red discusses in the video, but it's a really interesting look at what it is that comprises a tragedy and how the form has evolved from the Greek tragedies with things like Oedipus Rex, which has been held up by Aristotle as the perfect tragedy, through to Shakespeare, we know I love Shakespeare, and then onwards to Arthur Miller and the more modern forms of the tragedy. I thought it was a fantastic insight into it and it informed a lot of the ways that I looked at these texts when I was reading them. So yeah, I'll link it below. Highly recommend if you are interested in that kind of thing. Also just because Red makes some really interesting points about the fact that Death of a Salesman is very, very similar to a Shakespearean tragedy, except for the fact that you do not have a character who is falling from high status like you have in, you know, Oedipus Rex. Oedipus is a king, and then, you know, most Shakespearean tragedies, Macbeth, he's King of Scotland, Hamlet, he's Prince of Denmark, all these things. Willy Loman is a salesman. He sells things. We don't even find out what he sells, and yet he can still have this huge tragic fall just like anyone else. It's real sad. It made me miserable, but it's really well done. Equally very complex to stage, not one I would like to attempt to stage myself, however it would be fantastic to watch someone else do. White Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys was a really interesting book. So I've already read Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. In fact, I read it last term as part of the novel module, which White Sargasso Sea is also a part of. And so to read this modern book that is essentially an attempt at a post-colonial prequel to Jane Eyre was really interesting. White Sargasso Sea follows Antoinette Cosway, who is Bertha Mason in Jane Eyre. However, it is the woman that she is before she meets Mr. Rochester, when she is a white woman living on what was a slave plantation in the Americas, and about her life as a white woman in a mostly black environment, and about her as, I mean, it's awful, but it's about her as an outsider. While it is very post-colonial and it critiques the Western ideas of white supremacy and the male gaze and the attempts of patriarchy, and especially white patriarchy, to control, it still ends up sympathising quite a lot with this white woman who owns black slaves and servants, and it's interesting. I found it really engrossing to read. It's also a very quick read. It's about 180 pages. It's a novella, really, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it because of the insight that it provides into Jane Eyre. You know, Jane Eyre has long been held up as a very feminist book, especially considering it was written by a woman in the 1800s. And yet, when you think about the fact that Jane Eyre, she is a woman who comes into fortune, who is able to make her own way in the world, realistically, it's because she's white, and it's because she has wealthy relatives. So I found it really interesting, both as a book in and of itself, but also in the context of Jane Eyre and the ways that we had looked at Jane Eyre last term. Yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it. And that's all I think I'm gonna say. As you can tell, I've been reading a lot. Most of my days at the moment are either reading or trying to, you know, remove my brain from the amount of reading I'm doing, but it's really good, it's really interesting, and I hope that I've been able to share some interesting perspectives about the things that I've studied, some interesting opinions perhaps, because a lot of what I study is classical works, you know, even if it's not the classics like the Iliad, it's, you know, books like Jane Eyre or The Importance of Being Earnest, where they have such a well-known canon in our culture that to actually be able to read them and study them and encounter them as they are is quite an experience, and I'm really enjoying it. As I said, I am currently reading Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, and I'm hoping to get that finished in the next week. I also have a couple of things coming up after that. I can't tell you off the top of my head. Oh, I can tell you a couple of them. I'm reading Top Girls by Churchill as one of my plays. I haven't talked about most of the poems that I read in this video just because I'm reading like 8 poems a week for each of these lectures, and for the last 4 weeks we've just been talking about elegies, pastoral poetry, and pastoral elegies. I might make a separate video actually about poems that I've discovered through my degree that I've really enjoyed, because as you know, I keep a poetry binder full of copies of my favourite poems, and there are definitely some I've encountered through doing my degree that I will be adding to it, so yeah, maybe that'll happen at a later date. Yeah, that is it for now. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this was interesting. You know, I enjoy talking about books, and it's a very different ballpark to be talking about things that I'm studying as opposed to things that I am just reading, me as an individual for my enjoyment. But yeah, I hope it's interesting because I like getting to share these things. It's a really fun way of getting to engage with these things a second time. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see more of my bookish content. Please do like this video if you did indeed like it. And if you've read any of these texts and you have your own opinions, please comment down below, because it'd be really interesting to see who's read some of these for fun, perhaps, as opposed to the things that I've been coerced into reading for my degree. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Oedipus, the Oedipus complex, is just one of those things ingrained in our consciousnesses. Conscience. our collective conscience. There we go, that's the word. Oh, there are people in my building. I just have to pretend that they don't exist. It's fine.